Hey everyone, this week I just wanted to record a quick video and go over something that's really important in public speaking that often gets neglected, and that is going to be the introduction and the conclusion to your speech. Something I have noticed is that students sometimes tend to rush through these things. They say, oh, I'm not good at writing this, so I'm just going to skip it. However, the biggest chance you can have of losing people listening to you is to have a weak introduction or to not have a conclusion. It's kind of like a job interview. If you've ever been to a job interview or you've ever interviewed someone, you know that usually first and last impressions are the strongest. If you had a great interview in the middle, they're less likely to remember that if the beginning and the ending of your interview were weak. So that's kind of why we talk about introductions and conclusions. So very quickly, I just wanted to give you 4 things that you're going to need to do when you're writing each of these things. So we'll start with introductions. So with the introduction for your speech, there are 4 things you're going to want to do. The very first thing you want to do is get the attention and interest of your audience. It's kind of like if, let's say you were at home one weekend and you cut a movie on TV that you've never seen before. If something exciting doesn't happen in the first few minutes of that movie, the odds are you're probably going to change the channel. It's a lot like that with introductions for speeches. If something interesting doesn't happen at the beginning, odds are people are going to tune you out and not listen. So the very first thing you want to do is get the attention and interest of your audience. And there are different techniques to do that. Some people like to tell stories. For example, for your projects, if you are doing a topic that is something that is directly related to you, maybe you have a story you can tell us. Some people like to use quotes. If they're powerful quotes, that is good. Some people like to take some kind of action. For example, I had a speech one time where somebody was showing off a workout routine, and they started off by exercising at the beginning of their speech. And it was visually interesting. One of the classic ways to get attention is to ask the audience a question. However, the important thing to note there is that your question should actually be an interesting question. For example, I've seen presentations before where they were talking about certain food items and opened up with a question, something like, how many people in here like food? Well, if you're human, presumably you like at least one food in order to live. So, it's not terribly attention-grabbing or interesting. So if you use a question, just make sure it's something that is actually thought-provoking and not something that just has a simple answer. And then, really, these aren't the only ways. Just be creative. Okay, so that's the first thing you want to do. Number 2 is you want to introduce your topic. Actually let us know what you're talking about. I've heard speeches before where I didn't know what the actual topic was until about halfway through the speech. You do not want that, so make sure you introduce your topic. Number 3 is especially important. You want to establish your credibility. This means that you should give people a reason to believe what you have to say, because otherwise, why should they listen? So that you can do this different ways. If you have a direct connection with your topic, then tell us what your connection is. For example, if you're talking about an exercise routine, how long have you been exercising? Do you help other people exercise, etc.? So what's your connection? So give some kind of credibility there. Why should we listen to you? And then the last thing you want to do is preview your main points. Let us know what you're actually going to be covering next. It kind of gives us a nice, your audience, it gives a nice reference for them to sit and think about so that they know as they're watching what they can expect. So these are the 4 things you need to do in introductions. Number 1 definitely needs to be number 1. Number 4 definitely needs to be number 4. Although you can establish your credibility while you're introducing your topic. So number 2 and 3 can kind of be switched around a little. But 1 and 4 definitely need to happen in that order. So let's talk a little about conclusions very quickly. Conclusions also have 4 different things that you should do. The first one is use what we call a signpost to signal your conclusion is ending. If you think about when you're driving down the road and you see a signpost, usually it gives you a direction. It lets you know which way you need to go. A signpost in your speech kind of gives your audience a signal as to which way your speech is going. So you want to let people know your ending, usually by using a word or phrase, something like in conclusion, finally, lastly, to sum everything up. But you want to use one of those to give people a signal very clearly that your conclusion is beginning, you're fixing to wrap up your speech. The next thing you want to do is summarize your main points. Just very quickly reiterate what I've talked to you about today. For example, let's say your speech is about, making a birthday cake. So today, just to remind you, we've talked about the ingredients for your birthday cake, we've talked about the directions for baking, and we've talked about how to frost your cake. Okay, so that's kind of like a summary of your main points. You want to have that. Number 3 is you want to remind people why your topic is important. So give people a clue like, hey, I'm talking about how to tie a necktie. Well, that's important because you may have to go and dress up for a job interview someday, or something along those lines. Just give people a reminder of why things are important. Finally, at the very end, kind of like with the beginning of your speech, you want to use something vivid and interesting to give your conclusion some oomph, like to make it memorable. So some people like to use a story at the end. What some people will do is start a story in the introduction of their speech and then come back in the conclusion and finish. So you could do that. Some people like to use quotes. Some people like to use startling statistics to end with to leave people something to think about. Some people will make very dramatic, bold statements. You could do that. But whatever it is, you just need to be creative. And that's the biggest thing. With introductions and conclusions, don't skimp out on them. They are so, so, so important. And if you don't do them right, chances are you're going to lose your audience. Even if it's somebody that really cares and loves to listen to you speak. If you don't do these two things right, sometimes it can leave people with a less than favorable impression. So hopefully this has given you some thoughts and some things to work on while you're putting together your introductions and conclusions. Please let me know if you have any questions, and have a great week.